Morning, everyone. It's the last day of March, March 31st, and somehow, wow, I am so ready to have March behind me. And it's been a hard month, been a very hard month, and in my mind, there's a feeling that it'll be better in April. But actually, as we read about the progression of the virus, and we hear our governor's pronouncement yesterday about additional measures to make sure we're staying safe. It seems like we're in this not for a sprint, but we're in it for a marathon, and it's very important that we approach it that way. It reminded me of this passage this morning that we read in our devotions, where Jesus is promising us that we're going to go through difficult times. In fact, he specifically says that the difficult times that he's referring to have to do with persecution. But I was thinking about it in terms of the fact that laughingly, I wore my baseball cap this morning because I was missing baseball. The fact that baseball season was supposed to have started a few days ago, and I've been a real baseball fan since the second grade, and I follow it pretty closely. And it's just not there, nor are other sports. But obviously, in comparison to all that's going on in the world right now, not having baseball is probably pretty minor in the whole thing. But it reminded me also last week, as I was listening to a podcast by one of my favorite authors. His name is Pastor Tim Keller, and he remarked that his observation is that this post-World War II, the post-World War II generations, of which, of course, I'm one of them, and maybe you are too, are the only generations in really the history of the world that has had the experience of where they always expected things to go well, where the previous generations had kind of expected that life was going to be really hard. And somehow, since the end of World War II, things have been just up and to the right in the United States anyway. And though there have been minor dips, there's always been this unbounding optimism about the future. And I'm certainly not a pessimistic person, but I also know that one of the most important parts of life is learning to navigate through difficult times. And Jesus tells us that. In fact, he kind of gives us a two-prong approach for it in this particular passage. In verse 16, he says, "Look, I am sending you out as sheep among wolves, so be as shrewd as snakes and as harmless as doves." And what I read him saying there, how we can translate it for us, is that he's given us wisdom, and he's given us knowledge, he's given us shrewdness to be able to navigate through the difficult times. And that's important, that we use what he's first given us, the wisdom and the knowledge that he's given us. And then he goes on and says, gives us the other side of it. In verse 19, he says, "When you are arrested," or another way to say that is, when you go through these difficult times, don't worry about how to respond or what to say. God will give you the right words at the right time. For it is not you who will be speaking, it will be the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. And I think that passage, those two passages together, kind of give it our part and God's part. And we know that we have a part to play, but ultimately it's God's the one who is going to bring us through this. And it brought us to verse 28, which was, of course, out of the message for Sunday, where Jesus said, "Don't be afraid of those who want to kill your body, for they cannot touch your soul." And killing your body actually sounds pretty bad, but Jesus is saying, in comparison, there's a much higher level of concern that we should have, and that's for our souls. And of course, it's only God that is the one who is in charge of our souls. And in the Message paraphrase, Jesus goes on to say, he says, "Save your fear for God, who holds your entire life, your body and soul in his hands. And then he goes on to say, and what's the price of 2 sparrows? Is it not 1 copper coin? But not a single sparrow can fall to the ground without your Father knowing it. And the very hairs on your head are numbered. So don't be afraid. You are far more valuable to God than a whole flock of sparrows. And that's a beautiful reminder that Jesus is most important, and it's his love that everything is based on, and that he loves us very, very much. He cares for us far more than he even cares for sparrows, and he's walking with us through this time. And then it reminds me at the end of the New Testament, there's the book of James. In the very first chapter, 2nd verse, James starts out his book with this amazing perspective that I think is really the perspective that Christians all throughout history, as well as people throughout just the history of the world, have needed to have. And he says, dear brothers and sisters, when troubles come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. And when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. And he says, if you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. And I liked what one author said. He said, don't waste your troubles. Troubles are a great chance to grow. It's definitely not something we would choose, but it's a place where God can really work in our lives. And so if we trust him, he'll bring us through. And so let's stay connected, and thanks for this time together this morning.